The story of Diego Armando Maradona begins in the dust and poverty of Villa Fiorito, a shanty town on the southern outskirts of Buenos Aires, where survival was a daily victory. Born on October 30, 1960, he was the fifth child and the first son of a factory worker and a housewife. The legend goes that as a toddler, he fell into an open cesspit in the dark, and his uncle had to rescue him, shouting, "Dieguito, keep your head above the shit." That phrase would become a metaphor for his entire life. He received his first soccer ball at age 3 as a gift, and he slept with it tucked inside his shirt for fear it would be stolen. By the time he was 9, he was already a local sensation, playing for the youth team Los Cebollitas, the Little Onions. They went on a 136-match winning streak, fueled by this small, stocky boy with a mop of dark hair who seemed to have a magnetic connection with the ball. Even as a child, he entertained crowds at halftime of professional First Division games, juggling the ball with his left foot, his knee, his shoulder, and his head, never letting it touch the ground. The crowd would chant for him to stay on the pitch as the professional teams returned. In a grainy black and white television interview from that era, a 12-year-old Diego stares at the camera and says, "I have 2 dreams. My first is to play in the World Cup, and the second is to win it." Part 2. His professional debut came just 10 days before his 16th birthday, playing for Argentinos Juniors. He was the youngest player in the history of the Argentina Primera División. When he entered the pitch, the coach simply told him, "Go, Diego, play like you know how." And he did. Within minutes, he nutmegged an experienced defender, signaling to the country that a new king had arrived. Despite his brilliance, he was controversially left out of the 1978 World Cup squad because the coach felt he was too young, a rejection that left a scar on his psyche and fueled a desperate hunger for redemption. In 1981, he moved to Boca Juniors, the club of the working class, the club his father supported. It was a match made in heaven. The stadium, La Bombonera, shook whenever he touched the ball. He wasn't just an athlete, he was becoming a symbol for the disenfranchised. He guided Boca to the league title with a style of play that was both aggressive and artistic. He was short, with a low center of gravity that made him nearly impossible to knock over, and he possessed an acceleration that left defenders chasing shadows. Europe was watching, and after the 1982 World Cup in Spain, the inevitable happened. Barcelona broke the world transfer record to bring the Argentine prodigy to Catalonia. Part 3. Maradona's time in Barcelona was a period of immense frustration mixed with flashes of brilliance, serving as a prelude to the darker chapters of his life. He felt like an outsider in Catalonia. He fell ill with hepatitis, which sidelined him for months, and he struggled with the discipline expected by the club's hierarchy. The lowest point came in a match against Athletic Bilbao, where a defender known as the Butcher of Bilbao shattered Maradona's ankle with a horrific tackle. Many thought his career was over, but he returned through sheer force of will. However, his tenure in Spain ended in chaos. During the Copa del Rey final in 1984, played in front of the King of Spain, Maradona was taunted by opponents throughout the match. When the final whistle blew and Barcelona lost, Diego snapped. He headbutted one player, kneed another in the face, and sparked a mass brawl on live television. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated rage. The Barcelona executives decided he was too volatile to keep. They put him on the transfer market, expecting a giant like Juventus to call. Instead, the call came from a city that was considered the sewer of Italy by the wealthy North, Naples. Part 4. On July 5, 1984, Diego Maradona arrived in Naples. He was presented at the San Paolo Stadium, where 75,000 people paid just to see him juggle a ball. Napoli had never won the Italian league title. They were a team fighting relegation, representing a city plagued by poverty, unemployment, and a reputation for crime. But for Maradona, it was perfect. He identified with the Neapolitans. He saw Villa Fiorito in the chaotic streets of Naples. He said, "I want to become the idol of the poor children of Naples because they are like I was in Buenos Aires." The city embraced him not as a player, but as a savior. He was patronized by the Camorra, the local mafia, who offered him protection and access to anything he desired. In return, he gave the city hope. On the pitch, he was transforming a mediocre team into a powerhouse, single-handedly taking on the giants of the North, AC Milan, Juventus, Inter. But off the pitch, the pressure was suffocating. He could not walk the street without being mobbed. He began to live at night, and it was in Naples that his casual use of cocaine turned into a dependency that would haunt him forever. Part 5. The summer of 1986 in Mexico was the zenith of his career, the month where Diego Maradona ceased to be a man and became a deity. He captained an Argentine team that was not considered a favorite. The quarter-final match against England remains the most famous 90 minutes in football history, laden with political tension following the Falklands War between the two nations just 4 years prior. In the span of 4 minutes, Maradona displayed the duality of his nature. First came the hand of God, where he punched the ball into the net past the English goalkeeper, a moment of cunning and deceit that he celebrated as an act of justice. Minutes later came the goal of the century. He received the ball in his own half, spun away from 2 defenders, and embarked on a 60-yard dash. He dribbled past 4 English players, rounded the goalkeeper, and slotted the ball home. It was a miracle of balance and skill. He dragged Argentina to the final against West Germany and assisted the winning goal. He lifted the World Cup, fulfilling the dream of the 9-year-old boy from Villa Fiorito. He was the undisputed king of the world. Part 6. Returning to Naples as a world champion, Maradona achieved the impossible. In the 1986-87 season, he led Napoli to their first ever Serie A title, the Scudetto. The celebrations in Naples lasted for a week. Coffins were carried through the streets for Juventus and Milan, symbolizing the death of the northern dominance. Murals of Maradona were painted on ancient buildings, and shrines were erected with his picture next to Jesus Christ and San Gennaro, the city's patron saint. He won another league title in 1990 and a UEFA Cup. But the higher he rose, the darker his personal life became. He was trapped in a golden cage. He partied with the Camorra clans. He had a son he refused to acknowledge for years, and his cocaine addiction spiraled out of control. He would play on Sunday, party until Wednesday, detox on Thursday, and play again on Sunday. The club helped him cheat drug tests using clean urine from teammates. It was a delicate house of cards held together by his genius on the field, but the cracks were beginning to show. Part 7. The fall began at the 1990 World Cup in Italy. Argentina reached the semi-final where they were drawn against Italy. Cruelly, the match was played in Naples. Maradona asked the Neapolitans to support him instead of their own country, highlighting how the rest of Italy looked down on them. The stadium was divided. Argentina won on penalties, and Maradona scored the winning spot kick. He had eliminated the host nation in his own backyard. Overnight, he went from being a god to being the most hated man in Italy. The protection he enjoyed from the authorities and the media vanished. In 1991, after a league match, he was selected for a random drug test. This time, there was no switch, no help. He tested positive for cocaine. He was banned from football for 15 months. He fled Italy in disgrace, leaving behind a city that still loved him but could no longer protect him. He was arrested in Buenos Aires for drug possession shortly after, paraded before the cameras in handcuffs, unshaven and dazed. The king was naked. Part 8. After serving his ban, Maradona attempted to rebuild his career. He had brief, forgettable stints at Sevilla in Spain and Newell's Old Boys in Argentina. But his eyes were fixed on one last glory, the 1994 World Cup in the United States. He trained like a madman, shedding weight and getting into shape, desperate to show the world he wasn't finished. In the opening game against Greece, he scored a magnificent goal. He ran to the sideline camera, his eyes wide and bulging, screaming into the lens, a primal roar that was equal parts joy and mania. It looked like a redemption story. But days later, after a match against Nigeria, a nurse walked onto the field to escort him to a doping control station. He had tested positive for ephedrine, a banned stimulant. He was thrown out of the tournament. He claimed he was innocent, crying that they cut off my legs. It was the effective end of his serious career. He returned to Boca Juniors for a final sad twilight, where his flashes of brilliance were overshadowed by his declining physical state and erratic behavior. He retired in 1997, a shadow of the man who had conquered the world. Part 9. Retirement was cruel to Maradona. Without the discipline of football, his life spiraled into a chaotic mix of health scares and bizarre public appearances. He gained an enormous amount of weight, reaching a point where he could barely walk. In 2000 and 2004, he suffered massive heart attacks caused by overdose, dancing on the edge of death. He spent time in psychiatric clinics and rehabilitation centers in Cuba, where he befriended Fidel Castro and tattooed Che Guevara on his arm. He underwent gastric bypass surgery and managed to reinvent himself as a television host, interviewing stars like Pelé. He even returned to football as the coach of the Argentine national team for the 2010 World Cup, a chaotic tenure that ended in a heavy defeat to Germany. He coached in the UAE and Mexico, often looking unwell, sometimes needing assistance to walk, his speech slurred. Yet the fans still flocked to see him. He was a walking tragedy, a man being consumed by his own legend. Yet his charisma remained untouched. He was flawed, vulnerable, and painfully human, which only made his worshippers love him more. Part 10. The final chapter closed on November 25, 2020. Diego Maradona died of heart failure at the age of 60 in a rented house in Buenos Aires, recovering from brain surgery. The news stopped the world. In Argentina, the government declared 3 days of national mourning. His body lay in state at the presidential palace, the Casa Rosada. Over 1 million people lined up to say goodbye, leading to riots and tear gas when the police tried to cut the line short. In Naples, the San Paolo Stadium was immediately renamed the Stadio Diego Armando Maradona. Tributes poured in from every corner of the globe, transcending sports. He died as he lived, surrounded by chaos, adored by millions, but ultimately alone in his struggle. He was not just a footballer. He was a cultural phenomenon who represented the triumph of the underdog. He showed that a boy from the mud could touch the sky, even if he burned his wings on the way down. As a banner in Naples once read, "You don't know what you missed," to the dead in the cemetery. Diego Maradona was the beautiful, tragic, perfect storm of football, and the world felt a little emptier without him.